Program Director, Minister Jeff Radebe, and your co-program director, MEC Paul Mashatile, Me Baby Kgositsile, and the Kgositsile, Moagi and Mabalane families, the National Chairperson of the African National Congress and the Treasurer General of the ANC, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, members of the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress and members of the PEC and the REC of the ANC, the Premier of our province, Dr. David Makura, Speaker of the National Assembly, Me Baleka Mbete, members of Parliament, ministers and deputy ministers, mayors of our municipalities and metros, members of the provincial legislature, members of the diplomatic corps, poets, artists, cultural workers, comrades, and friends and compatriots. When our departed brother Keorapetse Kgositsile penned, "My name is Africa," we knew that neither exile nor death had the power to uproot his umbilical cord buried at the sacred kraal in Ditakong in Mafikeng, where the spirit of his grandmother, Nkgono Dikeledi, jealously guards all the children of the family and indeed all the children of the village. Today we pay homage to an extraordinary South African who devoted his life to the service of humanity. Professor Keorapetse Kgositsile, fondly called Brawili, was, as we've all heard, an internationally acclaimed and renowned poet and an activist who leaves a great legacy in both our cultural as well as our political landscape. He was a multidimensional individual whose activism transcended different realms of human endeavor. Today we celebrate the life of a poet, but also the life of a teacher, a father, a husband, an MK combatant, an ANC cadre, a servant of the people, and a consummate intellectual. We celebrate the life of a selfless man who contributed immensely to the development of his people and the society that he lived in. He was a poet who knew that as a cultural worker, he had a responsibility to employ his voice to speak against the injustices of the world. He argued in one of his papers, Culture and Resistance in Southern Africa, that the artist is both a participant and an imaginative explorer in life. And the struggle for national liberation is an integral part of our life now, and in it there is no such creature as a revolutionary soloist, close quotes. Brawili's life was the manifestation of this assertion. He was among the pantheon of writers who used their pen to fight against the injustice of apartheid. He associated himself with people's resistance struggle from an early age, dating as far back as the 1950s, when he became a member of the African National Congress. He found a platform for articulating the anxieties of our people on the pages of the New Age newspaper, where he worked alongside one of the most illustrious martyrs of the liberation struggle, Ruth First. He wrote politically incisive articles which made him an easy and a clear target of the apartheid regime. As the political situation was becoming volatile and the apartheid administration becoming more vicious and more lethal, enacting draconian laws to suppress the voices of the masses of our people and persecuting those who resisted, Kgositsile was not deterred. He was not discouraged, and he forever remained committed and brave. He continued serving the mouthpiece of the oppressed. After the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, activists streamed out of the country to wage a fierce fight against apartheid from abroad. In 1961, the year in which the ANC established its military wing, Umkhonto weSizwe, he was one of the young cadres who was sent into exile. The leadership of the ANC recognized his potential to be the envoy that would amplify the voice of the liberation movement throughout the world. Brawili left South Africa at the tender age of 23 and only returned to home soil in his 50s after the unbanning of his liberation movement. He served the ANC with commitment, with great passion throughout his exile years. He was one of the most trusted cadres of our movement. He wielded his pen with precision, choosing words that challenged, that inspired, but that also provoked. He worked closely with President O.R. Tambo and contributed to several historic documents that informed the ANC's conception of the National Democratic Revolution. Brawili, to those who really got to know him, will attest to the fact that he was a humble person who never dwelled on his own achievements or his own importance, who never spoke about his contribution to the attainment of our freedom. Humility was his second name. He spent a significant number of his exile years, or years in exile in the United States, where he established himself as a poet and a political activist, whilst at the same time furthering his studies. He was one of the foremost intellectuals and activists that connected the African American literature and culture in the 60s. He was able to straddle the social strata relating to the young and the old, the rich and the poor, and the domestic and the intellectual. We already heard how the word straddle was taught to one of our artists, Comrade Mabuse, and he was able, at a very early age, to perfect the straddling process. He was a major link between different generations of writers in Africa and writers who were in the diaspora all over the world. He was able to bridge the gap between African and Black American culture, writing extensively on poetry and his much-loved music, jazz. The revolutionary group of poets, the Last Poets, was inspired by his words and took its name after one of his poems. Brawili was indeed one of the greatest chroniclers of our time. His poetry is imbued with a deep sense of compassion. His poetry provided proof that a poet is a possessor of unusual sensitivity or insight. He is able to express things in a beautiful and incisive way. Those who have taken time to read Brawili's poems will know that he had great insight and displayed great insight in his poems. He is also a very imaginative and a creative, but at the same time a very artistic poet. Through his words, we can see that he had high perception and imagination as well as profound insight on the human condition. He masterfully infused into the English language phrases evocative of Setswana idiomatic expressions. His involvement in the struggle was driven by a genuine desire to fight human injustice as epitomized by apartheid. As we bid farewell to this son of the soil, let us derive comfort from the realization that he lived his life to the fullest and leaves a lasting legacy in cultural landscape. He is indeed the flame that burned bright in our darkest hour, illuminating and informing the world about the plight of the oppressed masses of our people in South Africa. It is often said that great prophets are never revered in their own communities. While Brawili was renowned internationally, particularly in the United States, it took long for him to be equally celebrated on home soil. This anomaly, a result of the tyranny of exile, has been corrected in recent years, most notably in the bestowal on him in 2006 of the status of South Africa's Poet Laureate. His passing should be a salient reminder of the important role that poets, writers, and other artists play in our society. We must do more to sustain the legacy of this icon so that future generations know who Keorapetse Kgositsile was. His passing compels us to ask some important questions of ourselves. We need to be asking ourselves whether we are doing enough to recognize and celebrate artists amongst us. What can we do to ensure that their stories, their lives, do not vanish. We must celebrate our artists while they are still alive. Because the contribution of poets, writers, our artists, and other cultural workers should never be diminished, because they are part of the makeup of who we are. Through their poetry, they are, in the end, the pulse of our society that reminds us that we are human. Poetry is the heart, the eyes, the soul, and the spirit of humanity. Poetry is personal history. It is the dreams, the desires, and the reflections of a nation. Poetry expresses the beauty of life's struggles and provides hope and inspiration. Where there is no hope, poetry tends to create hope. Where there is no inspiration, poetry tends to inspire. The role of poets is as vital as that of the combatants in the trenches or that of political leaders and members of our communities all over the country. In our unfolding democracy, we need writers and other thinkers who can occupy the foremost trenches in our ongoing efforts to respond to the challenges of our historic moments. Brawili was a fervent believer in youth development, and he was also a leading agent of nurturing young talents. He always encouraged the youth to hone their skills to empower themselves, particularly with regard to reading and to writing. He believed that by empowering the youth, we are in the end essentially empowering the nation. As the National Poet Laureate, he devoted his time to teaching, imparting skills and knowledge through workshops and public reading, as well as performing poetry across different platforms, locally as well as internationally. He mentored numerous younger poets, many of whom have become household names today. The celebration of the life of a departed patriot like Brawili is not just an act of commemoration, but it is also about the preservation of our heritage and the affirmation of our national identity. It is through the telling of our stories that we will be able to look back on the road that we have traveled. It is through the telling of the life stories of our poets, of our artists, of our cultural workers, that we will be able to tell the story of a nation. Brawili remained engaged in political activism even into the democratic era. He was part of that core of ANC veterans who continued to breathe life into the body of the African National Congress. And we hail and applaud the role that he continued to play right to the end of his life. He particularly remained active in the structures of the movement, including his own branch, the John Nkadimeng branch. He was active in a number of other areas of endeavor. To the end, his mind was occupied with the challenges of our revolution and the tasks we must undertake to return to the path of justice, freedom, and equality. He was continuously seized with ensuring that we address the key challenges that face our nation, which is unemployment, poverty, and inequality. In one of his recent poems, No Serenity Here, I hope my sister does hear that I am quoting from Brawili and not from John Keats or somebody else. Comrade Eleanor, I hope you are hearing this. I fear the end of peace, he wrote. I wonder if that is perhaps why our memories of struggle refuse to be erased. Our memories of struggle refuse to die. Both in his poetry and his lived experience, Brawili demonstrated his love and his care for the next person. He is remembered as the epitome of humility, of frankness, of compassion, fortitude, and endless wisdom. His story will be a great inspiration and a point of reference for future generations. I'm told that Brawili expressed his desire to have a nationally significant 80th birthday party this year. Although he has passed on, Mama Dorothy Masuku, although he departed without that lunch that you meant to have with him, I believe that it would be important to fulfill his wish to have this 80th birthday celebration that he so wanted to have. The literary and academic communities, working in close collaboration with the relevant government institutions, should consider instituting programs to celebrate Brawili's legacy in what would have been his 80th birthday. This can be in the form of, yes, public lectures, consolidating his body of work into a single publication, organizing a symposium or festivals themed around his works, or establishing a poetry award. We may not see his signature smile again, and signature smile he had. We may not share another embrace nor handshake with him, but his staccato voice will reverberate from beyond the grave. Even a monster like death cannot silence the voice of a poet like Brawili. He was our dream maker. His poems are littered with the dreams that he had for our people, and hence he was our dream maker. But he was also our dream broadcaster. We wish and hope that those that he nurtured and those that he mentored will carry on forward with his work and become. His wisdom is clearly imprinted in the books that he wrote for eternity. He will continue serving as the guiding light in our collective journey as we move forward to implement the dreams that he had for our people. The best tribute we can pay to a poet is to read his poetry, to be transported by his imagery, to be startled by his frankness, and to be humbled by his sincerity. Like the struggle, our memories of Brawili refuse to be erased. Robala ka kgotso Brawili, namane etuna ya tholo, wena morolong wa Matebele. Ke a leboga. Thank you very much.